The bulk of the discussion has been about war powers and president's power during emergency, but in general, the Bush administration began, as I recall, with with an energy policy conference directed by the vice president, which was kept completely secret from Congress and the public, and all through the Bush administration, the president made significant use of signing statements when with regard to congressional acts in which they were not just explanatory, but maybe even exculpatory, dismissive. And so I think the issue of the presidential power during the Bush administration has, and its use and expansive view of it has significant ramifications beyond war powers and emergency. And I'd like maybe you all to address that aspect, presidential power.
Well, yeah, I think it's an excellent observation and question. I mean, there are some ironies here in the fact that we're talking about this matter with respect to a Republican president, since the Republican Party has been historically the party of small government and wanting to invest more power in civil society and less in the formal political institutions. And yet the Bush administration has in fact operated to concentrate more power in the executive branch, which is the least scrutinizable, the most opaque branch by its very nature. So this is ironic. I think the remark you quoted earlier, that the effort to create a stronger executive and thereby a stronger federal government, ironic enough, in the case of the party that's historically the party of smaller government, is in fact going to leave a legacy of significantly weakened executive institutions that could, because of popular skepticism and congressional wariness about what has actually happened. So I think the legacy is actually going to be, ironically enough, to weaken the executive for the near term.
I would say in regard to the two things you mentioned, and there are other examples outside those, I think it's quite fair to say the Bush administration has claimed executive powers in the domestic area relating to law enforcement, and what you're talking about is called executive privilege, the right to keep secret internal discussions of the executive branch, and executive interpretation of the law. I would say this, that I think previous presidents, and especially President Clinton, but President Reagan and Bush, and I think going back all the way to Truman, also did similar things. They just didn't do it at the pace that Bush did. So, and sometimes we would agree with the use of these powers. So take executive privilege, for example. Today we tend to think of it as hiding things, concealing scandal because of the Watergate and so on. But before Watergate, sometimes people generally applauded the use of executive privilege. Eisenhower forbade any member of the executive branch from going to Congress before the McCarthy hearings and saying anything about internal deliberations of the executive branch. And people thought that was great, good for Eisenhower, right? But, I would concede today the modern attitude towards the privilege is a negative one. I would just say, I don't think Bush has been different in terms of the nature. He might just be different in terms of how often he claimed those powers. I would also say that I would agree with a sort of deeper assumption, I think, behind your question, which is, doesn't it seem like there are more conflicts between the executive branch and Congress in this administration than there have been in previous ones? I think that may not be true in light of the Clinton administration. It may be, I'm not sure, but there certainly have been a high rate of conflict. I think that's inevitable when you have something like wartime, national security issues, and certainly when you have the kind of large administrative state we do where the executive and Congress have very different ideas about policy.
But there's the rub, is that you've just called it wartime. And this goes back to what we were discussing a few minutes ago. Is it in fact the legitimately war or war equivalent situation that we've been in?
Yeah, and that's a question even that the executive branch and Congress can be said, at least leaders of Congress during different periods of administration have sharp disagreements about. And I would say, one thing I would say is that, I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, I think there's a remedy for it. I mean, Congress has a lot of tools at its disposal to attack the executive branch if it disagrees with a claim of privilege, if it disagrees with signing statements. Congress, it's not just the constitutional powers, it's enormous political sway in Washington, and its ability to, I was about to say manipulate, I mean to guide the press, and its ability to hold hearings, oversight hearings, funding, confirmation. They can really get the executive branch and the Ministry of State to do what it wants if they really put their mind to it. And I say as someone I was a general counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I used to do that for a living, and it's not difficult.